Or what I see most often is people wanting to stay on the routine of exercising and will prioritize the exercise over sleeping when, let's say, we are feeling fatigued. I would say it'd be better to sleep a little bit more, sleep in, and either not work out that day or do a lighter exercise later on in the day. Here are 5 tips to support your hormones. The first one is that we should redefine or rethink about how we feel about movement or just exercise in general. Now, the biggest thing that comes to mind when we think about exercise or movement is all of the social pressures around that we need to be exercising a lot, or that we need to go hard, or that if we are not in pain or sore the next day, then therefore it wasn't a good exercise. But these are things that aren't going to really make you motivated to want to work out in the first place, and also aren't really healthy for your body just in general. Now, I'm not saying that exercise is inherently bad or that we shouldn't be exercising, when in fact we do need to move our bodies and move them often. But when it comes to how often and how to move it is where we really need to have a bigger conversation, because a lot of the exercise research is a lot of the time done on male bodies, male athletes, and it really doesn't apply to us that have hormones, that have more of a cyclical dynamic to us. Now let's go back to the original topic of, okay, so how often should we be moving our body or exercising? Now that won't be a very straightforward answer, because once again, like I talked about, we are cyclical, we're dynamic. So what we want to do for movement will vary depending on where we are in our cycle. When I am right before my bleeding, I'm not going to go for a run. I'm not going to do some HIIT cardio. I'm not going to box. I'm not going to do any of that, because that isn't where my energy levels are at the moment. Instead, something more realistic or something also better that would support that phase would be things like some yoga, walking, maybe some Pilates if I feel like I have a little bit more energy, but something that is a little bit more less impact. So instead of doing a hard fast rule on how often, where I need to be working out 3 times a week, no matter what, isn't really supporting us, because it will vary depending on what we're doing that week, also where we are in our cycle, and how we're feeling just in general. It can seem counterintuitive, but it would be better for our bodies for us to listen to them. And if we are feeling tired, if we are feeling like we really don't want to bust out a workout, then listening to that wisdom, because forcing our bodies to exercise when we don't want to, when they don't have the energy, is inherently putting a stressor on the body. Now, of course, exercise in itself is a stressor, and not all stressors are bad. But when we put into the bigger picture of just why it might be fatigued, why you might be fatigued in the first place, either chronic stress, there is a lot of deadlines, or you're just not quite sleeping the best, then all of that put together can cause some excess stress on the body, which when it comes to our hormone health isn't exactly the best for us. Now, instead of us focusing on how often we should be working out, emphasis on the should, instead we should focus on the types of workouts that we want to be doing. Now, like I mentioned, there is more of the high impact or high intensity workouts. Think of cardio, boxing, running, all of the different types of movement that really get the heart pumping, that really make us sweat. These are what is known as high intensity, the things that are going to be most likely cardio, that are kind of going to get the blood pumping. That is categorized as the high intensity, more high impact. And then things that are low intensity or low impact that are still equally as necessary and beneficial will be things like weight training, Pilates, yoga, walking, all the things that are good to get the body moving, but aren't going to be as taxing on the body. And which exercise or which movements that you want to go with should depend on how you're feeling that day, where you are in your cycle, and what's going around just in general in life, to pick more exercises that are going to better support you, instead of trying to force your body into something when it is itself fatigued. That's going to be a lot more important when it comes to our hormone health than just checking the box of, oh yes, I exercised today. Right, and the next tip is having a protein or fat with every meal, which this one can seem pretty easy and straightforward, but usually for breakfast is where we will see that sometimes that might not be something that we consider when we think of what we're going to have for breakfast. Now, a lot of the times we see this with healthy breakfasts that are outside of the rule, so things like oatmeal or smoothies that might not have enough protein and fats, which will end up in blood sugar spikes, which we don't want that, especially at the beginning of the day. Because what can happen when our blood sugar spikes, when we do have, let's say, a smoothie with a lot of fruit in it, maybe a little bit of peanut butter, but not enough to counterbalance the effects of all of the fruit, the sugars from the fruit. And then when we have that, it rises our blood sugar, And then, of course, insulin comes in to help rebalance the blood sugar ratios, but that also has our body releasing a little bit of cortisol just to be able to ratio back out the amount of blood sugar to insulin, which in turn does cause a bit of a stressor on the body, which in itself won't be bad. But if we think about the accumulative effect of what we're doing on like just a daily basis, and also just having that similar breakfast throughout weeks or months, that can be pretty tasking on our body. So when you are thinking of meal planning for the week for any of the meals, either breakfast, lunch, snacks, or dinner, something that should be prioritized is thinking if there is enough protein, if there is enough fat in this meal, just because those are a lot of the building blocks that our hormones are made out of are coming from the healthy fats and the proteins. And that's because our bodies are made up of a lot of healthy fats. So think of our skin, nails, hair, the myelin sheath that our neurons are coated in, our brain, all of that has a lot of fat in it. And then we also need a lot of protein because our body just uses that up because we ourselves are a lot of protein. Now, an extra bonus tip is try not to skip breakfast. It really is the most important meal of the day. It is the first fuel, you could say, that our bodies uses after going so long without eating. So it's really important to try to have breakfast first thing in the morning. And ideally, you do want to be naturally getting hungry when you first wake up. Not when you first wake up, but just after maybe like an hour or so, you should naturally be getting hungry just because your body is craving some nourishment, and it's good to be having that nourishment relatively after we get up in the morning. Now, the next big tip is you want to be aware of what you are using and consuming on a regular basis, both internally and also externally. Now, when it comes to internally, that is going to be things like food. Now, ideally, you want to be getting good quality food, so that is going to be non-GMO, grass-fed, organic, whenever possible. I know it is a little bit more expensive, so that's why I say whenever possible, that is ideal. Opting for a good water filtration system, just so you are having good quality water. Also, being a little bit more discerning when it comes to vitamins and supplements, trying to kind of go that extra step to making sure that they are sourcing whatever vitamin it is from a good source, that the company itself is in good standing, and also being aware of the products that you're using externally. So that is both on the skincare side, so skincare, regular skincare, lotions, perfumes, all the things that you use on a regular basis, as well as makeup, because our makeup also can have harmful ingredients and chemicals added to them as well. Now, a couple of really good resources when it comes to looking up ingredients on those products are things like the EWG database, Skin Deep, and also the Think Dirty app. Now, the fourth biggest tip when it comes to how to best support our hormonal health is going to be prioritizing sleep. Sleep is super important, and it impacts basically every facet of us, from our endocrine system, so our hormones, to our digestive system, our nervous system, our mental health. All of these are really impacted from the quality of sleep that we're having. Sleep is the time where our body is doing a lot of, you can think of maintenance work and just processing all of the things that we ate, for instance, that day. That is when our liver is the most active, processing everything, processing our hormones. So you really want to prioritize and get good quality sleep, because it also will impact how well our body is able to get rid of things like cortisol or adrenaline. Now, it also seems that sleep is really important for our thyroid health. Now, thyroid isn't really something that we consider when it comes to how to best support our hormones. But when our hormones are out of balance, it negatively impacts our thyroid, and our thyroid will then further negatively impact our hormones. So it comes into like a vicious cycle whenever our thyroid hormones aren't being able to be produced effectively. And what it does seem to show is that for our thyroid health, we do want to be going to bed roughly around the same time every night, and usually that's going to be around the 10 o'clock. So what exactly does that look like, prioritizing sleep? So some examples of prioritizing sleep, because obviously everyone loves sleep, so why wouldn't you prioritize it? But let's say you didn't get the best sleep the night before. Your 11-year-old husky that is getting to be a little restless at night keeps you awake all night from like 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. So a way to prioritize sleep the following day is obviously making sure your husky is able to fall asleep and stay asleep, but then also going to bed a little bit earlier. That way you feel a lot more rested since you didn't get good quality sleep the night before. Another example would be, let's say that you usually wake up at 6 a.m. every morning to either go to work or just be productive in general, and you don't want to get out of that schedule. But on your days off, especially when you're feeling really exhausted, you can push that back for maybe an hour or so just to get some good quality rest, especially on your days off. Or what I see most often is people wanting to stay on the routine of exercising and will prioritize the exercise over sleeping when, let's say, we are feeling fatigued. I would say it'd be better to sleep a little bit more, sleep in, and either not work out that day or do a lighter exercise later on in the day. Those are a couple of instances where we are prioritizing sleep because sleep is more important than exercising. And then finally, the fifth tip when it comes to supporting our hormonal health is resting during our period or during our bleed. Now, our period is a built in mechanism for us to rest. It is a way for our body to tell us that it needs time to rest instead of always being productive and doing all the things at all times and hustling and grinding and things that our society has kind of taught us in a way. It is a built in mechanism that lets us know that no, this is not the time to be doing all the things. It's time to be potato on the couch and resting, sleeping, reading, things that are going to be a little less taxing on the body just because our body is doing so much internally, but also our time for our minds to be able to rest as well. And one of the things that can happen when we don't let our bodies rest, our minds rest during our periods, during our bleed, is that our periods can become a little bit more painful because of the additional inflammation or the additional stress from cortisol and adrenaline that we don't get a rest from. So if that continues and that leads into chronic stress, that can lead into a little bit more inflammation, which can then further along impact our hormones by getting them out of balance or more painful periods, erratic cycles, and a further in the hormonal imbalance. So just as a recap, the 5 things that I would recommend the most when it comes to our hormonal health would be rethinking or reimagining our thoughts around movement and exercise, making sure that we're having a protein and a healthy fat with every meal, especially when it comes to breakfast. Thirdly, we want to be aware of everything that we're using consistently, both internally and also externally. Fourth is prioritizing sleep and sleep quality. And then the fifth is making sure that we are making space to rest during our periods and during our bleeds. All right, and I hope you found that helpful. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll be seeing you next time.